This is Hannah Berner from Giggly Squad. O-Pill is the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Let's be real, getting a birth control prescription is not always easy, and it's so much admin. In fact, about a third of women face barriers to access prescription birth control. Between scheduling appointments, missing work, class, or just trying to exist, it's a lot. But now O-Pill is putting birth control in our control. O-Pill is a daily birth control that's FDA approved, full prescription strength, and estrogen free, and 98% effective when used as directed. Grab it online or at most major retailers, no prescription or doctor's appointment needed. So if you're thinking about birth control, check out O-Pill to see if it's right for you. Use code GIGGLY for 25% off your first month of O-Pill at OPILL.com. That's code GIGGLY at OPILL.com. Birth control in your control. We love to see it.
If you're a smoker or vapor, ready to make a change, you really only need one good reason. But with Zyn nicotine pouches, you'll discover many good reasons. Zyn is America's #1 nicotine pouch brand. Plus, Zyn offers a robust rewards program. There are lots of options when it comes to nicotine satisfaction. But there's only one Zyn. Check out zyn.com/find to find Zyn at a store near you. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Hello and welcome to 31 Days of Terror 2025, day number 1. And if you're new around here and you're like, what the heck is 31 Days of Terror? It is where I bring you an episode every single day for the month of October to celebrate spooky season. Now, these episodes will be listener episodes, they will be interview episodes, and there will be episodes of folklore pertaining to the season. And with that, I have 3 spooky stories for you today, and story number 1 comes from James. It was August 2007 and I was 14 years old. I went on holiday to the south of France with my best friend James and his family during the summer break. We stayed in James's uncle's holiday home close to Tourette-sur-Loup, a small medieval village famous for its violet ice cream. One evening we visited James's uncle's business partner and his family in the rural Alps Maritime region. We drove at dusk for about an hour, passing an endless row of vineyards until we reached a beautiful villa with pristine lawns and mountainous views for miles. When we arrived, the adults and the kids naturally separated. We swam in the pool, played tennis, and had a delicious barbecue for dinner. Night fell, and while the grown-ups were gulping wine and swapping stories, we decided to play outdoor hide-and-seek with the host's kids. I remember it being a really still, humid evening, and it was still in the low 20s long after the sun went down. It was James and I's time to hide. The younger kids ran off to cover their eyes and count to 30. We decided to crouch behind a huge rock in the garden that overlooked the villa. The villa was more like a sprawling square bungalow, and I remember it being relatively modern, at least in comparison to James's uncle's house, which seemed much older and more traditional. As we waited in silence for the kids to find us, I looked through the French windows of the section of the house that was empty and cloaked in darkness. And what I witnessed, I still remember so clearly, nearly 20 years later. I saw 3 human figures, holding hands and slowly sidestepping in a circle. They were wearing all black, and their translucent, featureless faces contrasted heavily with their outfits. I could make out a short child wearing an overcoat, and 2 adults who towered above him or her, one of which was wearing what looked like a top hat. I rubbed my eyes and squinted, but they were still there. I nudged James and whispered, "Can you see that?" I nodded towards the French windows. He glimpsed and shrugged. "What?" The people. That's all I could muster. James said he couldn't see anything. I'm still not sure if it's because he wasn't focusing hard enough or because he genuinely couldn't see what I could. Another part of me thinks maybe he did see something, but he didn't want to believe it. After about 30 seconds, the figures stopped moving. they turned their heads towards us and slowly faded away. It was almost like they had noticed that they were being watched and decided it was the right time to leave. It hadn't dawned on me at the time, but it's clear looking back that the figures were doing the ring-a-ring-a-roses. I did a little research, and the origins of this rhyme and dance date back to the Victorian era, and it was a popular school playground jingle across Europe. It's only since the 1960s that the rhyme is said to have repeatedly referenced the Black Death, which spread throughout southern France during the mid-1300s. The closing line, a tissue, we all fall down, is believed to reference the diseased slowly becoming symptomatic and dying. This is the creepiest part of the story for me. There's something chilling about the idea of the dead singing about the dead. I barely spoke on the way home and had an unsettled sleep that night. If it was a paranormal experience, and I'm convinced that it was a very calm and passive one that happened at a safe distance. I wouldn't say I was freaked out, but it did feel quite profound, especially for a teenage lad already struggling to figure out the world around him. The encounter opened my brain up to new possibilities and definitely heightened my love for horror and spooky stuff. I've wanted to ask James's family about the people we visited and learn more about the area, but so much time has passed that I think it's better to let sleeping ghosts lie. After all, the paranormal is a divisive subject and an uncomfortable conversation to bring up so out of the blue. So I thought I'd share it with you guys instead. So after this story, I was looking up the origins of Ring-a-Ring-a-Rosie, or Ring-a-Ring of Roses, or Ring Around the Roses, whatever version that you know of it. And the kind of the version that I know is Ring-a-Ring-a-Roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down, or ashes, we all fall down. And there's been lots of conversation, you know, with folklorists about where this nursery rhyme came from. And people always say, or people often say, that it's to do with the plague. And so, for example, right, this is directly from Wikipedia. Since the Second World War, the rhyme has often been associated with the Great Plague of 1665 in England, or with earlier outbreaks of the bubonic plague in England. However, interpreters of the rhyme before World War II make no mention of this connection. By 1951, this interpretation had become widely accepted as an explanation for the rhyme's form that had become standard in the United Kingdom. So the thinking was that because, you know, it was a ring-a-ring-a-roses was like this rosy rash was a symptom of the plague, allegedly, and the posies of herbs that were carried as protection and to ward off the smell of the disease, because at the time people believed that smells sort of were a way of disease spreading, and then sneezing and coughing was a final fatal symptom. However, the version of like ashes is said to be like the cremation of bodies. However, folklore scholars actually believe that this is unfounded. So, because they kind of say, look, this explanation for it didn't emerge until the mid-20th century, and the symptoms don't actually link with the Great Plague. However, what is quite interesting is that, you know, it probably isn't to do with the plague, but it is a children's game that has been played for a very long time. And there are some who believe that it's actually probably linked to pagan myth and folklore, which I think is perhaps even more interesting. Is it possible that what you saw was indeed a group of figures playing Ring-a-Ring-a-Rosie, but in more modern times, not necessarily to do with the plague? Is it possible that it is to do with some sort of paganism, pagan rituals? Now, I don't know what the history or the ancient history of spiritualism is in this area of France, right? But fundamentally, whatever the explanation, I think it is a pretty crazy thing to have seen, to look up and see two adults and a child kind of sidestepping almost ritualistically in a circle. Whatever's going on there, it's pretty freaky, right? And they seemed to realize they were being watched and then decided it was the right time to leave, so just faded away. It'd be really interesting to know the age of this particular villa, this sprawling bungalow, as you called it. Like, is it obviously more recent? Is this to do with the land? Is this to do with the villa itself? Because if it's relatively modern, you'd be thinking, oh, well, you know, maybe it's not haunted, or maybe there isn't weird stuff going on. But as we know, as we've seen on this podcast thousands of times, the age of a house does not determine whether or not it is haunted or whether or not strange things happen in these houses. And I'd kind of love to know, like, if the family had experienced any strange things in the house. But it is tricky because, like you said, the paranormal can be a really divisive subject. And also, people who don't believe, like people who are like staunch non-believers, there are obviously some people within that circle who try to belittle people who do believe, right? And that's the same with anything. That's just like that's not just non-believers in the paranormal. It's the same with anything. If somebody doesn't agree with your opinion or belief on something, they might try and belittle you for it, and nobody wants that because it's uncomfortable for everybody involved. Maybe we need some sort of investigative team that work on cases like this, where we're like, okay, James would like to know whether or not this house that he went to all these years ago is haunted. So we're going to go knock on the door and say, someone had a paranormal experience in your house. We are not at liberty to tell you who, but we want to know what weird shit has been going on in your house. Like the Men in Black, but without the aliens and the kind of robotic, uncanny valley nature.
If you're a smoker or vapor, ready to make a change, you really only need one good reason. But with Zyn nicotine pouches, you'll discover many good reasons. Zyn is America's #1 nicotine pouch brand. Plus, Zyn offers a robust rewards program. There are lots of options when it comes to nicotine satisfaction. But there's only one Zyn. Check out zyn.com/find to find Zyn at a store near you. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Monday Sidekick, the AI agent that knows you and your business, thinks ahead and takes action. Ask it anything. Seriously. Monday Sidekick, AI you'll love to use. Start a free trial today on monday.com.
If you're a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility and your machinery isn't working right, Grainger knows you need to understand what's wrong as soon as possible. So when a conveyor motor falters, Grainger offers diagnostic tools like calibration kits and multimeters to help you identify and fix the problem. With Grainger, you can be confident you have everything you need to keep your facility running smoothly. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And story number 2 today comes from Ellie. My story is from when I was around 16. I remember walking into my childhood bedroom with the worst sense of dread and fear I have ever felt. I felt like real harm was going to come to me, and my heart was beating out of my chest. I remember looking up towards my bedroom door, and I saw a man, dressed in a knight's armour, walk into my room and stand to a halt by my bedroom door. Now, usually I think if anyone saw this, they would absolutely shit themselves, but a wave of calmness came over me, and I felt safe and fell back to sleep almost instantly. I had a friend whose mother was a medium. I spoke to her about what I had seen, and she told me that this was the knight in shining armour who comes to protect against evil. I had never heard of this knight in shining armour before, but I'm glad that it made me feel safe. So, right, this is really fascinating, and Ellie, you obviously, went into your childhood bedroom. Your body was telling you something was wrong, whatever that was. You had that sense of dread and fear, and you felt like real harm was going to come to you, and you were like, oh, this isn't fucking good, right? Something's wrong here. And then you see a man dressed in knight's armour walk into the room. The fascinating thing is, like, I sometimes wonder if our, I don't know, call them guardian angels, it's an easy way to frame it, right? People, our guardians, whoever the universe sends to look after us in various ways, I wonder, is it possible to literally show up in a way that you will understand? Like, a knight in shining armour is a symbol that we learn about from the time that we're kids. A knight in shining armour coming in to save the day. Did it show up as something that you would look at and immediately go, I'm safe, I'm calm, and I can go asleep? Right? Almost instantly. Is that why it showed up like that? That you in order to get the real benefit from it, you needed to be able to recognize something within it. It's an interesting thing to think about. If you could choose what your guardian angel looked like, what would you choose them to look like? Like, what would you want them to be like if they came bounding into your room to save the day? What would they look like to you? And our third story today comes from Grace. I wrote in many moons ago about my terrifying sleep paralysis experience with the spider-like gangly creature, and I was overjoyed to hear that you read it. Today, however, I'm going to be talking about the experiences my 2 twin aunts had living in a little house in Gages Lake, Illinois. It was the 80s, and both my aunts had just moved out of my grandparents' home and were able to find a small 2-bedroomed cottage that they could rent for a reasonable price. When they first moved, everything was perfect. They had a gorgeous view of the lake from the back of the house and finally had their own place to call home without the noise and nagging parents. That's when the first incident happened. It was late one night and they were babysitting my cousin David, who was 5 years old at the time. They'd put him to bed in one of their rooms and left the door ajar so that they could make sure he didn't get up to run around. After about an hour, they heard David crying. One of my aunts got up to go and check on him, but when she reached the door, it slammed shut in her face. She assumed that David was up and leaning against the door to keep her from coming in, but when she opened the door, she found my cousin in bed under the covers, sobbing on the other side of the room. When she asked him what was wrong, all he could do was point across the room to the darkened closet and say through sobs, "Johnny in the closet! Johnny in the closet!" My aunt was notably very scared and brought my cousin out to the living room where they were watching TV. He refused to go back into that room. After that night, more things started to happen. On a small table they had placed birthday cards to display. They left one day to go shopping, and when they came back, all the birthday cards were on the floor, stacked in a small pile. The last straw for my aunts came, however, one day, when the basket swing they had in their back room began to swing by itself. Keep in mind, no windows or doors were open. My Aunt Jean, who believes deeply in the paranormal, was so pissed off at this point with the ghost who's been messing with their belongings, she yelled, "I'm so fucking sick of you. Show yourself, goddammit," as loud as she could towards the still swinging basket chair. My Aunt Jane, who is more of a skeptic, covered her eyes with her hands and said, "No, please God, no, we're fine, just don't do that." Luckily the spirit never did make an appearance that day. After all of this had occurred, they finally were able to ask around the neighbourhood to see if anyone had died on or near their rented cottage. One of their neighbours finally filled them in. I guess in the 30s or 40s, a little boy named Johnny had drowned in the lake and his body was found outside where my aunts were living. They eventually did move out, and a few years later the house was torn down. I don't know if Johnny still haunts that area where the house used to be, or if he's finally moved on, but he definitely did his part in scaring the shit out of my aunts, and left them with an amazing story to tell their nieces and nephews for years to come. "Oh, Johnny, I'm really sorry that you drowned, but please don't come out of the closet at night time to scare small children. That is not good. We don't like that." And it really does sound like this was some sort of child energy, because while obviously the stuff that happened was terrifying, nobody wants a crying child going, "Johnny in the closet," when you hear a door bang shut and see it slam shut in front of you and hear a child, hear, your nephew crying or your cousin crying. Do you know what I mean? Like, nobody wants that. And it's very, very terrifying. And then you've got the cards being stacked up neatly and you've got the chair swinging. Like, it's all quite childlike. There's nothing really threatening about it aside from the fact that obviously everyone is frightened of it. But it's not like, it doesn't seem like it was trying to frighten the inhabitants of the house, more so just trying to make itself known or curious about its surroundings, like picking up the cards, putting them in a nice neat pile and, making the chair rock back and forth. Like, those things are quite childlike. And I genuinely often don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse to ask around for information. I mean, obviously, I would want to know. I'm somebody who needs to know everything about everything, right? If I've got a bone to pick with something, I'm going to find out all the information that I can, often to my own detriment. And then you find out that a little boy named Johnny really had drowned in a lake and you're like, oh, for God's sake. Then that means what happened with David was real. It was true. Johnny was in the closet. Johnny was making weird things happen around the house. Oh, you just don't need it, do you? Thank you so much for listening to day number 1 of 31 Days of Terror. Thank you to James, Ellie and Grace for sending in your stories. If you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
If you're a smoker or vapor ready to make a change, you really only need one good reason. But with Zyn nicotine pouches, you'll discover many good reasons. Zyn is America's #1 nicotine pouch brand. Plus, Zyn offers a robust rewards program. There are lots of options when it comes to nicotine satisfaction. But there's only one Zyn. Check out zyn.com/find to find Zyn at a store near you. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.